She was a young German shepherd, sitting all alone at a snowy crosswalk, soaking wet, shivering, and silent. No leash, no name tag. Just a red mitten tied around her neck and a heartbreaking note that read, "Please love her." What unfolded? After that moment will stay with you forever. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Now let's jump into the story. The wind had a bite that morning. It was just past 7 a.m. when Kendall Rivers pulled into the staff parking lot behind Hawthorne Middle School. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, soft and quiet, clinging to her coat sleeves and melting on her cheeks. The ground was already powdered in white, and everything felt unusually still, like the world hadn't quite woken up yet. Kendall stepped out of her car, coffee in hand, balancing a worn tote bag stuffed with lesson plans and overdue library books. She was a creature of routine. Every morning, she arrived early to open the library, sort the returns, and enjoy her first sip of coffee before the school bell rang. But that morning, something made her stop, across the street, just beside the blinking yellow pedestrian sign. Sat a small figure. At first, she thought it was a bag or maybe a pile of snow. But no, it moved, just barely. She squinted and felt her chest tighten. It was a puppy. A very small one, no older than 3 or 4 months, sitting perfectly still on the corner sidewalk. His fur was a patchy mix of golden brown and black. Soaked from the melting snow, he wasn't tied to anything. He wasn't barking or pacing. He just sat there, calm and watchful, like he was waiting for someone. Kendall's breath caught in her throat. Something about the scene felt off. She hurried across the street, her boots crunching through the ice. As she got closer, the puppy didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head, big ears drooping comically to one side. His eyes, deep and warm, locked onto hers. "Hey there," Kendall said gently, crouching a few feet away. "Where's your person, little one?" Around his neck was a child's mitten, red and soft, the kind that came in sets with tiny jackets. Tucked underneath it, fastened to his collar with a plastic clip, was a folded piece of paper. Kendall's hands trembled as she reached for it. Her heart was already thudding. She unfolded the note slowly. The handwriting was in careful, blocky letters, uneven and a little shaky. "Her name is Willow. She's kind. Please love her." That was it. No name, no number, no explanation. Just a plea. Kendall swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, and the edges of her eyes stung. The puppy Willow gave the tiniest wag of her tail. She stepped closer and nudged her damp nose into Kendall's gloved hand. She was cold, far too cold, and thin. Kendall could feel her ribs even through the fluff of her fur. "You poor thing," she whispered. "You've been waiting out here all night, haven't you?" Kendall looked up and down the street. Not a single person in sight. Just snow, silence, and the soft hum of early morning. She wrapped Willow gently in her own scarf and lifted her into her arms. The puppy didn't resist. In fact, she sighed a soft, exhausted sound and curled into Kendall's chest like it was the only safe place in the world. Inside the school, the building was still mostly dark. The janitor, Mr. Grant, looked up from the hallway with a puzzled expression. "Friend of yours?" he asked, nodding at the bundle in her arms. Kendall gave a weak smile. "Not yet, but maybe soon." In her library office, Kendall pulled out an old fleece throw blanket from the storage cabinet and wrapped Willow up tight. The little pup didn't move, just pressed herself against Kendall's side, eyes wide but trusting. She turned on the space heater and sat cross-legged on the floor with Willow nestled beside her. As the room began to warm, Kendall studied the note again. "Please love her." She couldn't stop thinking about those words. Simple, honest, desperate. Who had left Willow here? A child, it had to be. That mitten was handmade, and the writing. It wasn't an adult's. Kendall could almost picture it, a small pair of hands tying that mitten, clipping the note, giving one last hug, and walking away. It broke her heart. She made a few quiet calls. First to the school office, telling them she'd need a few extra minutes before opening the library. Then to local shelters and animal control. No one had reported a missing dog that matched Willow's description. By the time the first bell rang, Willow had stopped shivering. She had begun to doze beside the heater, her head resting on Kendall's boot like it was her favorite pillow in the world. Kendall didn't know what came next. But she knew she couldn't leave this puppy alone, not after that note, not after that sigh, not after the way Willow had looked at her. There was something unspoken between them. Already. As the school filled with chatter and the shuffle of backpacks, Kendall stayed quiet in her office with Willow. Snowflakes still fell beyond the window. But inside, there was warmth. A kind of quiet comfort neither of them had felt in a long time, and neither of them knew yet. But this was only the beginning. The next morning, Willow followed Kendall into the library like she had always belonged there. Students peeked through the glass windows before the first bell, their eyes wide with curiosity. Word had already spread that Miss Rivers found a puppy. A few whispered. Guesses flew around. Some thought she was a stray. Others said she belonged to the principal. But no one really knew, and Kendall wasn't in a hurry to explain. Willow had stayed the night at Kendall's small home, curled into a ball on an old cushion beside the couch. She hadn't made a sound, not even when thunder rolled in the early hours. Just stayed close, like she wanted to make sure Kendall didn't disappear in the dark. At school, she found her spot beneath the large checkout desk, right where the sunlight spilled across the floor. Kendall had brought an old dog bowl and a small blanket. Willow lay quietly, her eyes watching every move. Around mid-morning, a group of fifth graders came in for library time. Among them was a quiet boy named Arlo. He was new to the school, only a few weeks in, and hadn't said much since arriving. He sat in the back corner, always with a book, always alone. As the kids settled in, Willow stood up slowly and padded over to Arlo. She sat beside him and rested her chin on his knee without hesitation. He froze, his book halfway open. A few kids giggled softly, but Kendall didn't stop her. Instead, she watched closely. Arlo didn't speak. But after a few minutes, he reached down and gently placed his hand on her back. Willow wagged her tail once. Slow and steady. It was the first time Kendall saw a smile cross his face. Later that day, as the students filed out, Kendall walked over to where Arlo had been sitting. On the edge of the table, he'd left something. Behind a mitten. Red, hand-knitted, small. Kendall stared at it, her heart skipping a beat. It looked exactly like the one Willow had been wearing around her neck the day before. She picked it up carefully. It had tiny snowflake patterns on it and a loose thread near the cuff. She remembered that detail. She had seen that same thread hanging by Willow's collar when she first found her. That afternoon, Kendall sat in the staff lounge holding the mitten in one hand and sipping lukewarm coffee with the other. Her thoughts spun in quiet circles. Could it really be his? She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about the way Willow had gone straight to Arlo, the calm in his face when he touched her, it all pointed to something deeper. Kendall decided to speak with Miss Lena, the school counselor. Miss Lena was the kind of person who always seemed to know which students needed extra care, without them ever saying a word. I think Arlo might know something about the dog, Kendall said quietly. Miss Lena raised an eyebrow. Willow? Yes. She came right to him today. And then he left behind this. Kendall handed her the mitten. Lena examined it thoughtfully. Arlo's had a tough few months. His mom lost her job, and they moved into a new place last month. He's been distant, but sweet. Always polite, just quiet. Kendall hesitated. Do you think it's possible he left Willow out there, on purpose? Lena frowned, but not in anger. More like she was trying to put puzzle pieces together. Maybe, or maybe he didn't have another choice. Kendall nodded slowly. That line from the note came back to her again. Please love her. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was something else. A choice made with a heavy heart. Back in the library, Willow had curled up in her favorite spot beneath the desk. Kendall knelt beside her and placed the mitten next to her paws. Willow sniffed it gently, then nudged it with her nose. She licked it once and rested her head on top of it. Kendall took a shaky breath. That was all the answer she needed. The next morning, she brought in a small soft toy for Willow and a leash just in case. She wasn't sure what she'd say to Arlo yet, but she knew she had to say something. As the class settled in, Arlo walked in a little later than usual. His head was down. His coat looked too big on him, and his backpack swung loosely from one shoulder. Kendall greeted the students, then gently called Arlo over. I think you dropped this yesterday, she said, holding up the mitten. His eyes widened. He reached for it slowly, then stopped. His mouth opened like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. She's doing really well, Kendall added softly. Willow, I mean. At the sound of her name, the puppy perked up and trotted over. She sat at Arlo's feet and leaned gently into his leg. Arlo looked down at her, then at Kendall. His eyes were shiny. I didn't want her to be alone, he whispered. I just couldn't take her with us. Kendall nodded, not pressing. She wasn't alone for long. He knelt down and hugged Willow without saying anything else. She licked his cheek once, as if to say she understood. From that moment, Kendall knew this story was far from over. The next few days passed quietly, but something had shifted. Willow had become a regular in the school library. She greeted students with a gentle wag of her tail and always returned to her cozy spot beneath the desk. Teachers who stopped by found themselves kneeling down just to pet her. Even the school principal, Mr. Ellison, who usually stuck to his schedule like clockwork, took a moment to sit on the floor beside her one morning. She's calm, he said, scratching behind her ears. Good dog. Kendall smiled but said nothing. She had been thinking about Arlo a lot lately, ever since he admitted the truth that he had left Willow at the crosswalk because their new apartment didn't allow pets. His shoulders seemed lighter. He still didn't talk much, but there was a small change. A little more eye contact. A quiet kind of peace. Kendall couldn't stop thinking about what it must have taken for him to walk away. The mitten, the note, the hope that someone kind would find her. She wanted to know more. Not to pry, but to understand. That Friday afternoon, as most of the students headed out for the weekend, Kendall found Arlo standing alone near the bike racks. His backpack hung low, and his shoes were damp from the melting snow. Heading home? She asked gently. He nodded. I was wondering, she said, would you like to come visit Willow tomorrow? She's staying with me for now, but I think she'd love to see you. Arlo looked up at her slowly, surprised. Really? Really? The next morning, Kendall picked him up outside his building. His mother stood nearby, watching quietly, giving a small wave of thanks. She looked tired but grateful. Kendall nodded back. They drove in silence for most of the ride, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Arlo stared out the window, his fingers playing with the sleeve of his jacket. She used to sleep at my feet, he said suddenly. Kendall glanced at him. Willow? He nodded. At night. I'd read to her, and she'd fall asleep there, like she was guarding me. Kendall felt a lump rise in her throat. She still sleeps that way, she said. Right next to the couch. And I think she still feels like she's protecting someone. When they pulled into the driveway, Arlo's eyes lit up. Willow was already waiting by the window. The moment she saw him, everything about her changed. She barked just once, and then ran to the door, tail wagging so hard it looked like it might fall off. Kendall opened the door, and Arlo didn't even have time to kneel before Willow jumped into his arms. He wrapped himself around her, burying his face in her neck. Neither said a word, but they didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. Kendall turned away to give them a moment. Her eyes stung with emotion, but she didn't wipe them just yet. After a while, they sat on the floor with Willow stretched between them, her head on Arlo's lap. I didn't know what else to do, he said quietly. The shelter was full, and I was scared they wouldn't be nice to her. You made a hard choice, Kendall said softly, and a very kind one. You trusted that someone would take care of her. Arlo looked down at Willow. I just hoped it'd be someone who saw how special she is. I did, Kendall said. From the very first moment. Later that day, after they dropped Arlo back home, Kendall sat on the couch while Willow rested at her feet. She pulled out her laptop and typed into the search bar, how to certify a dog for therapy work. The idea had been floating in her mind for days. The way Willow brought out a softness in people, the way even Arlo, so quiet and guarded, had opened up around her, it was like she had a gift. Not every dog was like that. Some barked, some hid, but Willow simply listened. She didn't need words to understand. She just stayed close until people felt safe again. Kendall started reading about training and temperament tests, about hospitals and reading programs for children. It all sounded serious. It would take time and patience. But something inside her said, this is right. That night, Willow curled up beside her as she read more about therapy dog programs. Kendall reached down and stroked her head. Think you're up for the job? She whispered. Willow thumped her tail softly in reply. The following week, Kendall spoke with Miss Lena about her idea. You're thinking of training her? Lena asked with a hopeful smile. She's already doing the job, Kendall replied. I just want to make it official. Miss Lena nodded. I think she's ready, and I think you are too. And so, with a quiet kind of courage, Kendall sent in the first application for Willow's therapy dog training. She didn't know what would come next. But she knew one thing for certain. The boy who let go had given Willow a second chance, and somehow, in the process, he had given Kendall one too. The first time Willow walked into the hospital, the world felt a little quieter. The sounds of beeping machines, whispered conversations, and footsteps in long white hallways didn't seem to bother her. She moved slowly, gently, like she understood that this place needed softness. Kendall walked beside her, holding the leash loosely, her heart beating fast. She wasn't sure how Willow would react, or how the children would respond. But deep down, she trusted the dog who had once waited patiently at a snowy crosswalk with nothing but a mitten and a note. They started in the pediatric wing. Nurses smiled as Willow trotted in, her little vest neatly fitted, her eyes calm and alert. One nurse leaned down and said, I've heard about you, sweet girl. Willow wagged her tail, polite and quiet. They stopped outside a room where a young girl named Lena had been staying. She was 9, thin from treatments, and hadn't spoken to anyone since arriving. Her parents said she barely ate and refused to talk about her illness. Kendall hesitated at the door. Should we try? The nurse nodded. You can try. Just don't expect much. Willow walked in like she had done it 100 times. She didn't bark or tug at the leash. She simply walked to the side of the bed and sat down. Lena didn't turn. Her head was resting on her pillow, eyes staring out the window. Willow laid down, her chin resting on the blanket. She didn't get too close. She just waited. A full minute passed. Then 2, on the 3rd minute, Lena whispered, so softly it was. Barely there. Is she real? Kendall stepped forward. She is. Lena turned her head. Her eyes met Willow's, and for the first time since entering that hospital, a tiny smile crossed her face. The next day, when Kendall and Willow returned, Lena was waiting. She reached out and touched Willow's ear gently, holding it between her fingers. It's soft, she whispered. When I hold it, I don't feel scared. Those words stayed with Kendall for days. Each visit brought more small miracles. Children who hadn't spoken began to share. Others smiled for the first time in weeks. Some simply laid beside Willow and rested, as if her presence made everything less heavy. One afternoon, Kendall met a man named Charlie sitting on a bench near the hospital's entrance. He looked to be in his 70s, wearing a heavy coat and holding a photo in his hands. His eyes were red. Willow walked over and sat beside him. He looked down at her, then slowly reached out. "She looks like my Daisy," he said, voice trembling. "Lost her 2 months ago. Didn't think I'd ever feel that warmth again." Willow leaned into his touch. Kendall stood nearby, saying nothing. That was the magic of Willow. She didn't ask questions. She just showed up and made people feel seen. Back at school, Willow remained a quiet hero. Children took turns reading to her, sitting with her during hard days, and sharing their thoughts when words were too difficult to say to anyone else. Mr. Ellison, the principal, even printed out a badge and hung it by the library door. Willow, staff member and comfort expert, Arlo continued to visit. He never missed a weekend. He brought Willow treats, drew pictures of her, and even made her a new collar charm, a small silver mitten, like the one she had once worn. "She likes it," he said proudly, watching her sniff it and wag her tail. "She loves it," Kendall replied. One spring afternoon, Lena left the hospital. She had grown stronger, her smile wider. Before she left, she gave Kendall a note to read aloud. It said, "Thank you for letting me borrow her. She made the scary parts less scary. She was my brave." That night, Kendall sat on her porch, Willow curled up at her feet. She held the note in her hands and looked down at the little dog, who had brought so many back to life, without ever saying a word. "I think she's right," Kendall whispered. "You really are our brave." Willow lifted her head and placed it on Kendall's knee. Her eyes were soft, steady, as if she understood. Kendall thought back to the beginning, to the snow, the crosswalk, the mitten, the note. Please love her, she had, but more than that, Willow had loved right back, fiercely, gently, and without hesitation. Weeks later, a local reporter came to the school. They were doing a story on therapy animals. When asked how Kendall found Willow, she just smiled. "I didn't find her. She found me." The article went viral. People from all over wrote letters, sent gifts, and shared their own stories of dogs who had helped them heal. But Kendall didn't care much about the attention. What mattered was Willow. Willow, who now wore her badge proudly. Willow, who still waited by the door every morning, tail wagging, ready to go to work. Willow, who had once been left with a mitten and a note, but had ended up changing the lives of everyone she met. Kendall looked at her and whispered, "You were never just a puppy waiting for help. You were the help." Willow thumped her tail once in reply, and somewhere in a quiet apartment, a boy named Arlo looked out the window and smiled, knowing he had made the right choice. Sometimes, letting go isn't the end of love. Sometimes, it's just the beginning.